Hey guys, it's Maltha here once again, and it seems we've got ourselves a little bit of a build on our hands. This time around, I want to share with you guys my first attempt at making an Elemental Hit build. That is, since the big revamp that made Elemental Hit actually worth playing and very good. For the most part, I have done my best to avoid it because it's just very strong and a pretty well established build as converting lots of the damage to fire and just being a fairly overpowered bow build. But I really wanted to try and push the limits of what Elemental Hit can do with a Wander and an Elementalist. Elementalist, as you know from a few of my previous really fleshed out builds this league, is pretty damn strong with all the golems giving you lots of different buff effects, a lot of good generic damage, and then as well as that I'm using the Herald Ascendancies for penetration. I thought it could take on the role of a Wander quite nicely at this point in time. And I wanted to try and build around Ele Hit as pure Ignite, but then I got to thinking about triple elemental damage, and the character we have here is what ended up as a result. And the character does deal all three types of elemental damage. It does do cold, fire, and lightning, rotating between the three of them, and using elemental equilibrium, basically as the skill was originally intended. If you read the actual skill, it does seem like it wants you to just use all three elements, run some elemental equilibrium, and alternate between the three attacks. And for the most part, I don't think I've ever really seen people do much of that because it doesn't make too much sense to, since usually just grabbing a combat focus and focusing on one element is such a nice, strong way of building around Elemental Hit. However, in this scenario, it seems to actually work out pretty well and seems to be worth doing. I do attack with all three different elements. I am scaling all three elements at the same time with my type of damage, just going for good wand damage, elemental damage, and then all the golem buff effects. And in the end, with Crown of Eyes as well, we should have several 100%, maybe something like 600-700% increased damage to all three of my elements, not really focusing on any one more than the other. So then every single time we attack with elemental equilibrium especially, we make everything weaker to the other elements, and then whenever we follow up with another attack, we hit really freaking hard. In the end, this build seems to have some of the dumbest damage I've managed to put out, with everything lining up in single target situations so far when the build's like level 85, hitting for about 2 to 4 million damage potentially on the lightning hits. That's just hitting with that type of damage, so it's actually come together to become pretty ridiculous single target, which is the one main thing I was worried about. I use GMP and chain to clear with, and it clears like a dream, goes through everything very smoothly, and the little explosions that the skill now has built in do seem to clean up real nice when focused or when paired with chain and GMP, and then also Dying Sun for a couple extra projectiles. And I've really tried to go out of my way to fine tune this build and make it as good as possible. So I have picked the CI, the full energy shield route, though I think it can be done very successfully as a life-based build as well. However, I've just gone with the energy shield base because I thought I could, and I could craft a lot of gear to make things quite nice and fun for myself, and it seems to be just a completely ridiculous build. You can see throughout this attack here, I just then stunned the Eradicator out of his attack. I've never done that before on any character, stunned mid-attack throughout the sort of lightning tendril attack he was doing. It's just insane, the absolute top end of this character, because more or less a lot of the time it won't hit that hard, but it has the potential to hit way harder than anything I've done before with everything lining up correctly, especially the double damage focus mods. It's one of my more out there builds. I think it was tough to come up with and plan fully, and I'm still not fully done with it, but I do want to share with you guys exactly what I've done so far and how we got to this stage, and the stuff that it took to put the character together, and maybe some other thoughts about different ways of building it. So here is my character, currently level 86 Elementalist, called twice the Ele, half the damage. It was supposed to be based around just going pure fire and ignite proliferation, but I got too excited once I started thinking about the triple elemental combination of every single element into the build, and I decided to go with that, so the name's not really relevant. So as you can see, when you're attacking with Elemental Hit, it does go through the 3 elements, and it doesn't ever pick the 2 same ones in a row if you're using all 3 this way with no combat focuses. So once you're doing this type of an attack, you can reliably go with Elemental Equilibrium to increase your damage every single consequential hit after the first hit. Because Elemental Hit, if you read it, will do no chaos damage, no physical damage, and only damage of the type that it picks. So it doesn't matter how much plus everything else I have. Let's say I got lots of plus fire damage. Doesn't matter, because whenever it picks lightning, it will only do lightning damage. So it can't mess with the Elemental Equilibrium, and it becomes pretty reliable for the additional damage gain. The only slight issue with the Elemental Equilibrium is that you can't incorporate any other things into the build, like Orb of Storms, or Stormbrand for, Curse on Hit, maybe some Power Charge on crit, that sort of things as well. And as well as that, Herald of Thunder becomes kind of annoying, because once you've killed anything, it'll start shocking things or zapping down and hitting things with lightning damage, and then making them resistant to lightning. So to fix that, I actually had to attach a Brutality support to my Herald of Thunder. So I still have Herald of Thunder, but it doesn't deal any damage whatsoever. It just is purely there for buff effect through the Mastermind of Discord Ascendancy node here, because I do want all 3 of my heralds so they can get triple penetration for both cold, fire, and lightning, as well as the Elemental Equilibrium, as well as some other penetration throughout the tree. So it means that things are going to die pretty reliably, since nothing is ever resistant to me. And like the other few little Elementalist builds I've done, we are based around the Golem nodes. So with 8 golems with Anima Stone, with 8 golems using Primordial Chain. Likewise, with the other build, you do end up having an incorporated 400% increased effect of buffs granted by your golems, and 100% increased damage, 180% increased damage. You have to edit this manually into your, anywhere. I put it on my Anima Stone, because it doesn't work in PoB as the Ascendancy trait. It's not going to give you any increases, so if you want to incorporate all of that to see what your actual damage is, do recommend you do something like that. And likewise with this jewel here, Tempered Flesh, doesn't currently work in PoB, but it gives us 56 crit multi, so we just edit the item to show 56 crit multi. So with all of that, with all of our golems up, we get a lot of increased damage, a lot of crit, a lot of hit, a lot of attack speed, a lot of regen, and a lot of damage reduction. Seems to be a very, very strong way of building right now, and the passive tree, you might think, holy shit, it could be better, because it's just going everywhere. Nah, not really. We really want to go all the way down for point blank for huge extra single target, and for the most part, scaling pure elemental damage, elemental hit, it's kind of hard to scale any generic damage. Most things are going to apply just to one of your elements or one of your damage types, and in general, I've done just about everything I can to scale my damage, getting the 1 nodes, the crit multi, which is my next 4 points up here, going over to Spiritual Aid so that I can get some Golem life and regen as well, and then just going all the way to point blank. And as far as I can tell, it is currently worth the large amount of travel, but it also fills out some dexterity, which we definitely need, and some dual sockets. It is currently worth it, but I'm still in the process of fine-tuning the tree. Maybe it's not. We'll decide that in the future, but to be able to scale everything on the build, and once we already have so much % increased damage, it's kind of inefficient to grab more crappy nodes for increased damage. So I am using a Crown of Eyes. Spell damage does apply. Nodes like this are okay, but when we have so much % increased damage from golems and 1 nodes and weapon elemental damage, that sort of thing, they don't become very efficient, and you really want the more multipliers, which is why point blank is going to be so good. Speaking of more multipliers, we have a lot in the build as CI and this type of a setup. So we have Elemental Hit attached to damage on full life, Inspiration, which is up pretty much all of the time in the form of 5 charges, elemental damage with attacks, then running GMP and Chain to use for my clear, but for single target, swapping in hypothermia and energy leech. Both huge more multipliers, and once I'm running Blood Rage, we should have leeching effect up most of the time as well. And in the end, the pure single target damage, as you can see in the POB, on the lightning hit, something like 4.4 million average. On the absolute top end, sometimes we have power charges, sometimes we have frenzy charges, sometimes things are fully shocked, and I do mean fully shocked when they hit this goddamn hard. We do have some pretty ridiculous single target, as you can see, but for some sort of consistency, I haven't ticked everything I can, and that's currently where we're at. I do have a wand that has plenty of spell damage, bit of attack speed, and then I crafted 15% chance to deal double damage while focused, likewise on my shield. So once I press the focus button, should have about 30% chance to deal double damage, and that is pretty important when you want to be dealing those really big single target shocks on enemies. There is quite a lot to talk about with the gear, but all in all, I have tried to craft as much of my own as I can, and some of it has ended up pretty damn insane. So we are talking big energy shield, really big boots with good resist, really big gloves with insanity mod, which isn't super important, it's just for shield charge and it does make it feel a little bit faster, but I wanted to be able to craft a focus attack speed mod there instead, and I'd probably rather that, but since I hit that on my first essence of insanity, I have kept it. A belt, I bought this thing for 10C, I bought this wand for 15C, I was buying these insane jewels which have triple sort of wand stats, so attack speed and then crit and crit, multi, attack speed, crit and crit multi. I was buying those for I think 50C, 1X, 1X, all three of these types of jewels, which are pretty insane. So if you exploit sort of gap in the market that no one's really looking for, turns out you can make some pretty insane items and make a pretty insane build in the end. And as far as the chest is concerned, I did craft that as well. The only reason I'm not using crit on my wand right now is because I got crit on my chest through crafting, but you start with an eye level 86 regalia, and then you're just trying to get some sort of energy shield rolls, maybe some crit, maybe some support gems, plus support gems. It doesn't really matter too much. For the most part, I actually just wanted a really big energy shield regalia, so you'd use just spamming it with dense fossils. And if you're worried about the colors, it's not too complicated to get a whole lot of off colors. You start with just 4 sockets and use the crafting bench method to give it 4 off colors by going sockets in and out, lots, 3 into 4, 3 into 4, 3 into 4 until you have 4 off colors. Then you go from 4 into 5 until you have 5 off colors, which might take a few hundred jewelers, but it's not that unlikely. And then you go for the 6th socket and try and get 1 more off color. If you can't, you will have a blue, and that's not a big deal. You use energy leech over one of your other supports. But if you want to have the exact same setup as me, so that you can swap out greens and blues for whatever you want, then you try and get some Varici betrayal board action to get a white socket on your blue one, so you can swap in energy leech wherever you want. But 5 off colors really isn't hard to get using the crafting bench method, and then getting an energy leech into your build somewhere instead of like damage on full life really isn't a big deal. But this is currently what I've managed to land on, since we did get some white sockets, so it ended up working out pretty well. I do have just a multi-modded assassin mark ring, pretty basic, but I did roll minus mana cost on both my rings. Since my attack speed is so insane and my mana is so kind of crappy, I really wanted to make sure I could attack quite frequently, and that's the purpose of doing that. So I think it's worth doing, but if you can fix mana otherwise, by all means do. We then have flasks, sulfur flask. This thing will, with the stun mod recovery thing, make it so you're not getting stunned very often as a pure CI build, and then the regen helps keep our golems alive. It's pretty important. You then have a diamond flask, cinder swallow urn. Don't need a dying sun, but this is a very flexible slot here. You can put kind of whatever you want. If you can get at least a double balance for wise oak, then that's probably your best bet. But a dying sun helps just for a bit of extra clear speed, just a little bit more projectiles for attacking. and a Quicksilver Flask for some pretty fast stuff. Up here we have Herald of Ash, Herald of Ice, Enlighten, and Discipline. It hardly adds much percent reduction for your auras, but it does help squeeze in everything you can. Then using a level 1 Precision, Herald of Thunder attached to Brutality, and up here Stone Golem, Flame Dash, Blood Rage, more Golems, and they're attached to Elemental Army support, so whenever my Golems attack, they will be adding exposure as well, minus 10%, and we are talking about the ones we care about, Ice, Flame, and Lightning. And then lastly, I will mention that if you really need to squeeze in a bit more reservation, you can easily grab a 4% reduced mana node here, reduced reservation node here. For 1 point, it should really help you squeeze in more mana, or speaking to some of these down here. It's somewhat of a flexible tree. You can get more damage, you can get more attack speed, you can get more energy shield if you really want. Currently, this is what I'm working towards and getting these crit multi-nodes, and maybe I'll go a bit harder on the energy shield. I'm happy with 6,000 plus, but since my gear ended up rolling pretty well, it's got a little bit more. I think a much cheaper and easier way to build this character is life-based, and I will give you the life-based path of building as well, but overall it will be a weaker character because you won't really be able to bust out of like 5,500 life. But if you don't really want to try CI and copy this entire thing, if you still want to try something like this, the life alternative should be fine. As far as leveling is concerned, it is a little bit tough, especially in the first 30 levels. Wanders aren't particularly good. You do need some good leveling uniques, but as soon as you get Liege of the Primordial, put in an Anima Stone and start running this around level 34, you become a god and you can do whatever you want. And that's where we're at with the early hit character. Hopefully I'll give you a bit more end game in the next video, but you already saw what it's doing so far, and I think this is going to be my build of the league so far. Though we'll see in the next couple days how it plays out when it goes into end game as well. So far though, I just think it's got to be the strongest thing I've done, and one of the funnest builds to play. So good things to come in the end game. Hopefully I'll take it pretty far, maybe level 93, 4, 5, something like that. Hope you guys enjoyed the build. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.